Hello and welcome to Jane Doe's Dark Secrets, the true crime podcast where we delve into the most chilling and mysterious cases from around the world. I'm your host Jane, and each week I'll guide you through the twisted tales of unsolved mysteries, notorious crimes, and the dark secrets that lie beneath the surface. So, join me as we uncover the truth behind these gripping stories, explore the minds of those who commit these heinous acts, and seek justice for the victims. In this episode, we will explore the disturbing events that took place at this seemingly ordinary hospital where over 450 patients' lives were cut short under suspicious circumstances. We'll delve into the investigation that revealed a horrifying pattern of overprescription of powerful painkillers, and the whistleblowers who bravely came forward and the families who fought for justice. We will unravel the dark secrets behind the walls of Gosport War Memorial Hospital, seeking to understand how such a tragedy could occur. This is a story of betrayal, courage, and the relentless pursuit for the truth. So let's go into the background of the hospital. So Gosport War Memorial Hospital is a community hospital that provides a range of inpatient and outpatient services for the local community. These include, but not limited to, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, community mental health team, and a minor injuries unit. Gosport occupies a very distinct location on a peninsula in Hampshire within the UK, opposite the city of Portsmouth in the south. By water, Gosport and Portsmouth are only separated by several hundred yards. However, the separation by road is greater at nearly 15 miles, and the journey can take around half an hour in a car. Gosport is about 83 miles from London as well. Gosport has shaped its history, particularly in the terms of its military significance and its hospitals. The link between Gosport's military and the hospital is very long-standing. The Royal Naval Hospital at Haslar opened in Gosport in 1753, initially as a hospital for the sick and injured sailors, but much more recently, Gosport War Memorial Hospital opened in 1923 and today is the only remaining hospital situated within Gosport since the closure of Haslar in 2009. There are other hospitals in the wider Hampshire area at which the people of Gosport can be treated, such as Queen Alexandra Hospital in Portsmouth. Gosport's pride in its military connections was reflected in the naming of the wards at Gosport War Memorial, including Ark Royal, Daedalus, Dryad and Sultan. 3 of these wards have now been renamed. Moreover, the town's war memorial is situated within the grounds of the hospital and is home to the annual Remembrance Day service. The pride of the local people and their attachment to the hospital was illustrated by the successful campaign to save Gosport War Memorial Hospital from closure in the 1990s and then its redevelopment in 1994. So let's start at the point where the scandal came out. Concerns about the death at the hospital were raised in September 1998 when police commenced investigations into an allegation that a patient had been unlawfully killed on Daedalus ward. However, in March 1999, the Crown Prosecution Service, or CPS, decided there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. In 2001, a further police investigation took place, and yet again the CPS decided that there was insufficient evidence to proceed. Additionally, an NHS independent review panel found that whilst drug doses were high, they were appropriate in these circumstances. Following these 3 failed attempts to highlight problems, a complaint was made to the Health Service Commissioner against Portsmouth Healthcare NHS Trust about a death of a patient who had undergone an operation on a broken hip at another hospital. They had been transferred to Gosport War Memorial, and that the patient had received excessive doses of morphine and had not received reasonable medical nursing care and had been allowed to become dehydrated, leading to the death in December of the same year. The Commissioner undertook an investigation, at the conclusion of which he accepted professional advice that the medical intervention had been appropriate and that the patient's nursing needs had been met. However, in March 2001, 11 families raised further concerns with the police about the care and the deaths of their relatives in 1998, and 4 of these deaths were referred for an expert opinion. In August 2001, the police shared their concerns with the Commissioner for Health Improvement, or the CHI, and then the CHI finally then began an investigation. So in 2003, 2 years later, the CHI released their 121-page report on the deaths of the patients at Gosport War Memorial Hospital. This report presents the findings of an audit of care at the hospital that the Chief Medical Officer commissioned. So the report's findings were that opiates had been administered to virtually all patients who died under the care of the Department of Medicine for Elderly People at Gosport, and most had received the diamorphine drug by a syringe driver. Syringe drivers are small battery-operated pumps that deliver medicine continuously under the skin. They are often used when patients can't swallow or are less conscious, or to avoid frequent injections. Opiates were administered to patients with all types of conditions, including cancer, pneumonia, dementia, and strokes. Opiates were often prescribed before they were needed in many cases on the day of admission. So what are opiates and why are they so dangerous? Opiates is a name for a broad group of pain-relieving medicines. Opioids are made from the poppy plant, for example morphine, which you've probably all heard of, and they can also be made in a laboratory, for example fentanyl. I think many of us have seen those sad videos of people on fentanyl, or the so-called zombie drug. Other opioids that may sound familiar include codeine, Vicodin, and OxyContin. Opioid medicines travel through the blood and attach to opioid receptors in the brain cells. This blocks pain messages and can boost feelings of pleasure. What makes opioid medicines effective for treating pain can also make them very dangerous. At lower doses, opioids may make you feel sleepy, but higher doses can slow your breathing and heart rate, which can lead to death. Now, let's discuss a key character in this case, Dr. Jane Barton. Dr. Jane Barton was the GP at the heart of the Gosport scandal, who signed off on the medical prescriptions that potentially contributed to the early deaths of hundreds of patients. An independent inquiry, which started in 2014, has reviewed 833 death certificates, all signed by Dr. Barton, and found that 456 patients died and possibly 200 more had their lives shortened because of routine practice at Gosport War Memorial Hospital. The report stated there was a disregard for human life and a culture of shortening the lives of a significant number of patients between 1989 and 2000. However, there was no suggestion that Dr. Barton initially took the lives of the patients. She retired as a registered doctor in 2010 and no longer practices medicine. Barton graduated from the University of Oxford in 1972 with a Bachelor of Medicine before beginning work at Gosport War Memorial Hospital, where she practiced from 1988 to 2000. Her husband, Tim Barton, told the Sunday Times in 2002 that she had been under a huge amount of pressure and was severely overworked. Quote, "Instead of trying to find a new Harold Shipman, it might be more constructive to ask why a part-time GP was looking after 48 beds, he said. We will briefly recap Harold Shipman later on in the episode, but I'm sure you already know his story. A 2009 inquest into the deaths of 10 patients at the hospital found the administration of medication contributed to 5 of the deaths, with 3 of those not receiving appropriate medication for their symptoms. It found the skills of the nursing and non-consultant medical staff, particularly Dr. Barton, were not adequate. In 2010, the General Medical Council, or GMC, panel found that Dr. Barton prescribed potentially hazardous levels of drugs to the elderly patients whilst working at Gosport War Memorial Hospital. It found Dr. Barton guilty of serious professional misconduct, stating she made a series of failings in her treatment of the patients who later died, including issuing drugs which were excessive and inappropriate. But the GMC ruled that the doctor would be allowed to continue working if she abided by certain conditions. Outrage at the decision led the families to call for a public inquiry, and the decision was criticised by then the chief of the GMC for being too lenient. Barton said in a statement after that ruling, "Anyone following this case carefully will know that I was faced with an excessive and increasing burden in trying to care for the patients at Gosport War Memorial Hospital. None of the nurses who gave evidence were critical of my care. Of the patients in this inquiry, the consultants who had overall responsibility for the patients never expressed concern about my treatment and working practices. Throughout my career, I have tried to do my very best for all my patients and have had only their interests and well-being at heart." Okay, so now I will go through a summary of 4 patients and the timeline of their deaths that was recorded in the government and independent reviews that you can find online. So, patient 1 is Arthur Cunningham. In 1998, Arthur was aged 79. He was a widower who lived in a nursing home. He had a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, dementia, diabetes, and he also had an old pelvic injury. Arthur was experiencing hallucinations caused by his medication. His mobility was poor, and although he could walk, he also used a mobility scooter and a wheelchair. Historically, Arthur had lived in supported accommodation, but by June 1998, he was living in a nursing home, and he was a regular visitor to Dolphin Day Hospital within Gosport War Memorial Hospital under the care of Dr. Lord. On the 21st of July, Arthur was admitted to Gosport War Memorial Hospital because renovations were taking place at his nursing home. The clinical notes from that day record that he was cooperative and eating independently. He was quiet with mumbling speech, although his vocabulary appeared normal for him. Arthur reported he had some back pain, but he needed minimal assistance with personal care, and he was good at transferring himself from bed to chair. His mood was said to be variable because he was experiencing frustration and unhappiness with his lack of independence at times, and he also experienced paranoia. On the 27th of August, Dr. Lord reviewed Arthur and noted that his Parkinson's was a little worse, he was a little less mobile, and there had been deterioration in his renal function. However, he was eating better and he had put weight on, and therefore his mood had improved. Dr. Lord confirmed her view that he should be discharged the next day. 28th of August, Arthur was discharged back to his nursing home. So several weeks later, on the 21st of September, Arthur was reviewed by Dr. Lord again at Dolphin Day Hospital, and she noted a large sacral ulcer which she described as extremely offensive. Dr. Lord admitted Arthur directly to Dryad Ward at Gosport War Memorial Hospital with a detailed note that included plans for active treatment for his sore. His nursing home was requested to keep his place open for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, as he was expected to return home there. Dr. Lord recorded that Arthur's prognosis was poor, and she prescribed him morphine as required 4 hourly to be administered prior to dressing his sacral sore. Dr. Jane Barton also recorded on the same day in her clinical notes, "Transfer to Dryad Ward, make comfortable, I am happy for nursing staff to confirm death." This seems a little bit odd in my opinion to say that if he's only come in for pressure sore. Dr. Barton prescribed diamorphine, midazolam and hyoscine via a syringe driver. 23rd of September, the nursing notes record that Arthur was seen by Dr. Barton and that he had become chesty overnight to have hyoscine added to the driver, son informed of deterioration. The clinical records also say that Arthur's son was very angry that the syringe driver had been commenced It was explained to his son that the contents of the syringe driver were to control Arthur's pain. It was also explained that the consultant would need to give her permission to discontinue the syringe driver, and they would need to find an alternative method of giving pain relief. On the 24th of September, the nursing notes record that Arthur was in pain when he was being attended to, and that the diamorphine, midazolam and hyoscine had been increased. Dr. Barton then assessed Arthur and recorded in her clinical notes, "Remains unwell, son visited again today and is aware of how unwell he is. I am happy for the nursing staff to confirm death." 2 days later, on the 26th of September, Arthur Cunningham died at 11:15 p.m. Patient number 2, Elsie Devine. In 1999, Mrs. Elsie Devine was aged 88. She had 1 daughter and 1 son, and she lived with her daughter and her family. Elsie had lost her husband 21 years earlier, but had remained independent and self-caring. She was able to do her own cooking and cleaning. In January 1999, she started to experience some decline in her memory. Elsie was admitted to Queen Alexandra Hospital. In the days before her admission, she had become confused and aggressive and had been found wandering. She was deemed to be suitable for a rehabilitation program and fit for discharge, so she was admitted to Gosport War Memorial Hospital for rehabilitation. On admission, Elsie was assessed by Dr. Jane Barton. Dr. Barton then prescribed Elsie morphine 4 hourly. In relation to the morphine, Dr. Barton stated in a police interview in April 2006, "I was concerned that a low dose of pain-relieving medication should be available for Mrs. Devine in case she experiences distress and comfort, and a doctor was not available to write up a prescription for her." 25th of October 1999, Dr. Reed assessed Elsie and noted that she was mobile, able to wash with supervision, dress herself, she was continent but mildly confused. The 1st of November 1999, Dr. Reed assessed Elsie again and noted that she was physically independent but now needs supervision with washing and dressing and help with bathing. 10th of November, Elsie was noted to be confused and wandering. The following day, Dr. Barton prescribed 4 different opiates because, in her words, "We thought clinically she had a urinary tract infection at the time. The wandering around the ward became quite difficult to manage on an open geriatric ward, quite invasive for other patients and difficult for the staff to manage." 11th of November, the plan was to arrange for Elsie to visit her home twice a week to see her family and assess if she would be able to function better in her own home. 15th of November, when Dr. Reed assessed her again, Elsie had become restless and aggressive. 18th of November, a locum staff psychiatrist assessed Elsie and noted, "This lady has deteriorated and has become much more restless and aggressive again. She's refusing medication and not eating well. She does not seem to be depressed and her physical condition is stable." That day, Dr. Barton prescribed a fentanyl patch for every 3 days. 19th of November, Dr. Barton assessed Elsie and noted that there has been a marked deterioration overnight. She's confused and aggressive. Fentanyl patch commenced yesterday with midazolam. Son seen and aware of condition and diagnosis. Please make comfortable. I'm happy for nursing staff to confirm death. Dr. Barton also prescribed a syringe driver after noting marking deterioration over the last 24 hours, and Elsie was extremely aggressive, refusing all help from staff. 2 days later, on the 21st of November, Mrs. Elsie Devine died on Dryad Ward at Gosport War Memorial Hospital at 8:30 p.m. Patient number 3 is Gladys Richards. In 1998, Gladys was aged 91. She was a resident in a nursing home. She had fell and fractured her right neck of her femur, and she was admitted to Royal Hospital Haslar, where she underwent a partial hip replacement. She was then admitted to Gosport War Memorial Hospital for rehabilitation on the 11th of August 1998. Gladys was assessed by Dr. Barton, who recorded in her clinical notes, transferred to Dayless Ward for continuing care, frail, demented lady, not obviously in pain, please make comfortable. I am happy for nursing staff to confirm death. Dr. Barton prescribed morphine, diamorphine, hyoscine and midazolam. Is this rehabilitation? 13th of August, the nursing notes recorded, found on floor at 1:30 hours, checked for injury, none apparent. At time hoisted into safer chair. Right hip internally rotated, daughter informed. 14th of August, the nursing notes record, some pain in right leg, hip, this AM, and Mrs. Richards ate porridge. Dr. Barton noted in the clinical records, sedation and pain relief has been a problem, screaming not controlled, very sensitive to morphine oral solution, fell out of chair last night, right hip shortened and internally rotated. Daughter is aware and not happy, please x-ray. Later that day, the nursing notes record that Gladys's hip was dislocated and she was to be transferred to the local Haslar Hospital for reduction under sedation. A couple of days later, 17th of August, Gladys was then discharged from Haslar Hospital and transferred back to Gosport War Memorial Hospital. The same day, the hospital records further note that Gladys was in pain and distressed and that morphine was given to her. The notes record that Gladys's daughter had informed the staff that the surgeon had said that Gladys must not be left in pain if dislocation occurs again. 18th of August, Gladys was given 2 more doses of morphine. Dr. Barton later noted, still in great pain, nursing a problem, I suggest diamorphine, apalidrol, midazolam, please make comfortable. In the later police interview, Dr. Barton stated that when she examined Gladys, there was a lot of swelling and tenderness around the area of her hip. 19th of August, the nursing notes record that Gladys's grandson wished to speak with Dr. Barton later that day and that Gladys's daughter was not happy with various aspects of her care. The drug chart confirms that diamorphine, midazolam, apalidrol and hyoscine were given by syringe driver. Apologies for my pronunciation of those drugs, I am not a nurse or doctor. 20th of August, there are no clinical notes or nursing notes, but the drug charts confirm that 4 different opiates have been continued to be given. 21st of August, Dr. Barton noted, much more peaceful, but has a rattly chest. Later that day, at 9:20, staff nurse Sylvia Griffin recorded that Mrs. Gladys Richards had died. And finally, patient number 4, Ethel Thurston. In 1999, Ethel was aged 78 and she was a resident in a nursing home. She had learning difficulties and it was thought that she had a mental capacity around a 10-year-old. Ethel had once held down a job in a bank and was able to perform simple tasks and had been able to travel across London independently. 15th of June 1999, Ethel fell in her dining room of the nursing home and she was admitted to Haslar Hospital where she underwent a partial hip replacement. She was then admitted to Gosport War Memorial Hospital for rehabilitation and mobilisation. At the time of her admission to Gosport War Memorial, Ethel was able to wash and dress and feed herself. She needed some encouragement. Although she had limited vocabulary, she had no difficulty in communicating her needs. In addition to her fractured femur, Ethel had an ulcer on her lower left leg. 1st of July 1999, a fentanyl patch was prescribed by Dr. Jane Barton, and it was recorded to be given to Ethel every 3 days. 8th of July, Ethel was assessed by Dr. Victoria Banks, a psychiatrist specialising in old age. She observed that Ethel seemed to have dementia. 16th of July, Ethel was noted to be much more settled with no change to her medication. The plan at that stage was to transfer her back to her nursing home. Ethel was seen by Dr. Reed, who agreed with the plan for placement back into the nursing home, and he had noted that she had pain in her knees, but it was better when she was on fentanyl. And he also noted that Ethel was more settled and cooperative. 25th of July, the care plan entries record that Ethel had vomited the previous evening, however, she was a little brighter that morning. But they did record that she had been refusing all fluids and food and turned her face to the wall, also refusing painkiller fentanyl patches. 26th of July, Dr. Barton saw Ethel. She made a brief note in the clinical records. Further deterioration overall. Please keep comfortable. I am happy for nursing staff to confirm death. Syringe driver started, diamorphine and midazolam. That same day, at 7 p.m, a nurse confirmed that Miss Ethel Thurston had died. Ethel's death certificate recorded the cause of her death was bronchopneumonia and senile dementia. Again, another patient who was discharged to the hospital for rehabilitation but ended up passing away. Okay, going back to the 2003 Commission for Health Improvement report, it concluded patients admitted to Gosport were elderly with severe clinical problems. Most had been transferred from acute hospital settings after a period of intensive management, at the end of which it had been concluded that further intensive management would have little or no benefit. However, the proportion of patients at Gosport who did receive opiates before death is remarkably high, and it is difficult to accept that the practice of almost routine use of opiates before death, dating from 1988 or earlier, merely represents clinical practice in advance of practice elsewhere. The practice may be summed up in the words found in many clinical records: please make comfortable. They were sent to Gosport for rehabilitation, but never left. The recommendations from the report are as followed. Investigations should continue into the deaths of the individual patients. In the continuing investigation into the deaths at Gosport Hospital, information about the rota followed by Dr. Barton and her partners should be obtained and used to explore patterns of death. Hospital teams who care for patients at the end of life should have explicit policies on the use of opiate medication. These policies should include guidance on the assessment of patients who deteriorate and the indications for commencing opiates. The findings reported in this review should not be used to restrict the use of opiate medication to those patients who really need it. In June 2018, a Gosport independent panel released a 387-page report on the concerns at Gosport War Memorial Hospital. The Gosport independent panel was set up to address concerns raised by family members over a number of years about the initial care of their relatives at Gosport War Memorial Hospital and the subsequent investigations into their deaths. Their website contains the panel report as well as an online archive of documents obtained and examined by the panel, and other documents created by the panel to assist in its work. I will attach the link to this report in the description. This report into the deaths found that there was a disregard for human life of a large number of patients from 1989 to 2000. There was an institutionalized regime of prescribing and administering dangerous amounts of a medication not clinically justified at the Hampshire Hospital, the report added. So by now you're probably asking, how did this whole scandal get highlighted to the police? Well, the independent report shows a staff nurse was one of the first to express her concerns about the use of diamorphine and syringe drivers way back in 1991, raising it with the local branch of the Royal College of Nursing. 10 nurses then went on to attend a meeting where they raised various concerns, including the fact that not all patients prescribed diamorphine were actually in pain, the fact that no other forms of mild painkiller appeared to be considered, and that patients' deaths are sometimes hastened unnecessarily. Yet records of this and subsequent meetings, conversations and correspondence show that these concerns were by and large swept under the carpet by the hospital management. From February 1991, when the staff nurse set out her concerns in a letter to the hospital's patient service manager, to January 1992, the report shows a number of nurses raised their concerns about the prescribing of drugs, in particular diamorphine. In doing so, the nurses involved, supported by their Royal College of Nursing, gave the hospital opportunity to reflect on their practice. In choosing not to do so, the opportunity was lost, deaths resulted, and 22 years later it became necessary to establish the panel in order to discover the truth of what happened. The documents reviewed by the panel tell a story of missed opportunity and unheeded warnings. It goes on to highlight the bravery of the nurses who attempted to raise their concerns about prescribing regime overseen by Dr. Jane Barton. I think to understand the whole concept of the events that happened in Gosport, it might be helpful to recall that the case of Dr. Harold Shipman coincided with this period time at Gosport. Dr. Shipman was a GP from 1974. Throughout his career as a GP, Dr. Shipman enjoyed a high level of respect within his communities that he worked. In Hyde in Greater Manchester, he was extremely popular with his patients, particularly the elder patients. In September 1998, Dr. Shipman was arrested, interviewed and charged with the murder of Mrs. Kathleen Grundy, and with other offences associated with the forgery of her will, the nurses concerned and the context which he was able to be the sole beneficiary of her estate. He was subsequently suspended from practice and charged with 14 further murders. In January 2000, Dr. Shipman was convicted of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery of Mrs. Grundy's will. He was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment and for the forgery, a concurrent term of 4 years. The trial judge said that his recommendation to the Home Secretary would be that Dr. Shipman would spend the remainder of his days in prison. The Professional Conduct Committee of the General Medical Council subsequently erased Dr. Shipman's name from the medical register. Between August 2000 and April 2001, the coroner for South Manchester conducted inquests into the deaths of 27 patients of Dr. Shipman, recording verdicts unlawful killings in 25 cases and open verdicts in remaining 2. On May 18, 2001, the coroner opened inquests into a further 232 deaths. The Shipman Inquiry published 6 reports between July 2002 and January 2005. Mr. Shipman died in 2004 by hanging himself in his cell at Wakeworth Prison, and as of today, he is Britain's most prolific killer. Back to our case at Gosport War Memorial Hospital. In summary, Dr. Jane Barton oversaw the practice of prescribing on the wards and is the only person to face disciplinary action to date. She was found guilty of failings in her care of 12 patients between 1996 and 1999. However, unlike Shipman, she was not struck off the medical register, choosing to retire after the findings were published. How do you feel about that? Do you think Dr. Barton deserved harsher punishment, or do you think she was simply trying to keep her patients pain-free, or in her words, easier to manage on the wards? In a statement in 2018, Dr. Barton said that she was a hard-working doctor who was doing her best for the patients in a very inadequately resourced part of the NHS. So some aftermath. In 2018, Dr. David Chivers, chair of the governing body for NHS Fareham and Gosport Clinical Commissioning Group, responded to the Gosport report by saying, "The events in the 1980s and 1990s described in the panel's report should not have happened, and we are truly sorry that the standard of care provided was entirely unacceptable and that families were not treated with the dignity and respect they deserve," he said. However, he added that much has changed since the events took place, and Gosport War Memorial Hospital was a much valued hospital in the local community. So the task of all local NHS organisations now, and the debt we owe to those families, is to meticulously review the contents of the report and to take whatever action is required to prevent such a situation from occurring again. As of the time I'm recording, in January 2025, the investigation into the events that unfolded at Gosport War Memorial Hospital and to the extent of the patients it affected is still ongoing, and there is still a current investigation. Before I sign off, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the immense pain and ongoing struggle of the families who are still to this day seeking answers about what happened to their loved ones. The loss of hundreds of patients under such tragic circumstances is truly heartbreaking, and I wanted to talk about this case as I don't feel that it's well known, considering the scale of how many innocent lives were affected and the lack of justice for the families. It is also important to note that since this scandal, Gosport War Memorial Hospital has undergone significant changes. Today it holds a good rating from the Care Quality Commission, which is the independent regulator of health and social care in England. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the dark secrets of Gosport War Memorial scandal. I hope you found this episode compelling, and if you did, make sure to follow Jane Doe's Dark Secrets for more true crime stories that uncover the hidden truths behind some of the world's most chilling cases. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Jane Doe's Dark Secret Podcast for more updates, and that's where I post images and the background information of the cases. Also, please share your thoughts on today's episode. I would love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments what other dark secrets you would like me to uncover in future episodes. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. This is Jane signing off.